So Marilyn, you've just been through some elections. Tell me why people want to become a councillor, why they should think of it, and how would you go about it, and what do you get out of it?
So in terms of becoming a councillor, one of the things for me, now my journey started more as, I would say, a local activist in terms of things were happening in the town, and a lot of it was to do with property development. And so when I was looking for help and support, there was a particular political party that came forward to help. And so that was my first interaction with them. And I would say one of the reasons for me, and I'm sure it's quite different for everyone, but for myself, it was the whole thing about being able to be more involved in the process, being a voice, because we had a local residents association. So I was the vice chair of that. And whenever they needed someone to speak to the council, I would normally get pushed forward, to go to the town hall to present and put our case forward. So it really felt like an opportunity to be more part of that, and being able to have a voice and be almost like a representative of the community and making a difference that way. And I know there are many councillors who will have a particular area that they're passionate about. So for me, one of mine is mental health. And the current council where I live, they already had a mental health champion. They are very passionate about looking at all things mental health. So for me, that was another way of making an impact and seeing what we can do to drive some of those agendas forward. So I think it's really different for everyone. And you were asking about, well, how do you go about it? It's a process that I didn't know anything about before I started. I had gotten a call from the mayor asking if I'd ever thought of standing for election. And once I'd said, well, okay, let's move forward, that's when everything started rolling. So there's the application process. And I don't know how the other parties do it. I'm just going to speak for the party that I represent. There was then a process where you're actually canvassing to the current membership. So we were during lockdown, so it was mainly telephoning people, having conversations. There was a hustings where, but I guess if people don't know that term, if you think of the political debates out in the United States where you get all of the candidates and they're going back and forth, it's not quite that dramatic. But we had the hustings where each of the prospective candidates would be given a set amount of time to speak. We would talk about who we are, what we're passionate about, what we're representing, what we would bring to the party, what we would like to do for our residents, the electorate. Each of us had an opportunity to do that. And then the audience members, and these were members of the party, they then have an opportunity to fire questions at us, which we would all then answer. After the hustings, they all get a paper ballot, which they fill in, you put X marks the spot. A couple of weeks later, there was another husting, it was the follow-up. And they actually were doing this all on Zoom. Normally it would be in person. And then while we were all there, a bit like you would do the election count that we were doing last week, they would open each of the ballots, hold it up to the camera to show you who the vote was for, and put them in the respective piles. And the hustings would then determine which of the candidates would actually then be put forward to stand for election for the party in what we call that particular ward. So that's a little bit about how the process works. And of course, once that goes forward, it's canvassing time to go out and meet the electorate, introduce yourself, tell them who you are, find out what the issues are. What is it what's happening for them? Is there anything they want to report back? What are the things they're not happy about? Where are the places they would like to see improvements? And then, of course, that all rolls into the election itself. And for those of you who vote, you know how that process goes. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It's fantastic. It was brilliant explained. What difference do you think you made? I think a lot of people think, increasingly actually, you can't make much of a difference in your local community.
It's definitely one I hear a lot. Now, one of the things I will say is I have a much better appreciation of why sometimes things take time to happen. So, for example, when I first met the mayor, I mean, I've met him several times, but the pivotal meeting where he then said, can you give me a call? And that was a call where he said, have you thought of standing for election? The mayor was, I'm pointing because it was just up the road from where I'm sitting. and he was doing an open meeting, and one of the things on the agenda was planning. And I thought, right, that's it, I'm going to go down and have a word with the mayor and find out why they're allowing all these buildings and what's going on, the town's being overdeveloped. So I went, with that in mind. And I, said to the mayor, I really have an issue with the way that the town is being developed. We're seeing so many of these proposals coming forwards for these big buildings. They're completely not appropriate for the town. And the mayor then explained more about the process. He said, look, we get targets from central government. We are under pressure to build, because Boris wants to build. And we're pushing back on those. And he gave me a bit of the background of the mechanisms in place. And I knew a bit of it already from myself, objecting to planning applications as a resident and knowing that it goes to an office, in our case, in Bristol, and the planning expectorate, all of that. But just getting that backstory, I was like, okay, I get it now. You're almost being pulled in several different directions. So people can make a difference, but you may not see the difference immediately. The analogy I will use is like planting a seed. Plant the seed, water it, maybe speak to it, a la Prince Charles. He talked about that decades ago. Now people are getting on board with that. But it's not going to grow straight unless it's a really fast growing plant, but it's not going to grow straight away. So you can look at the plant and go, well, that was a waste of time, and keep digging it up, and it's never going to flourish. But actually underneath, there are things happening beneath the surface. And I would say politics is often a bit like that. You're going to put emotion forward. You can't just go and, somebody said to me, can you move that bollard? Now, you would think that would be a simple enough request. I mean, I'm not physically going to move it, but you have to then go and speak to this team and that team and this team and that team. And then you figure out, actually, the bollard is there for a reason. So if you move that, and it just gets, so sometimes there's a complexity behind things, which is not apparent to the naked eye. But actually what I would say, and again, I can only speak for the party that I'm with, when residents put their ideas forwards, when they share their concerns, we take those back, we discuss those things in meetings, we see what we can do, we discuss what's viable, we speak to all of the other parties if it's something that's going to need a unanimous vote, and we want cross-party agreement, and all of that can just take time. And then if they have to go out to consultation, that can take several months, because there is a process in place, and before you know it, 6 months has gone by, 12 months has gone by. To the public, it looks as though nothing has happened, but behind the scenes, all of these things are being lined up, and eventually, hopefully, ta-da, the thing that you've requested, the thing that you've asked for, the suggestion you've made, it may or may not come to fruition. And if it doesn't, it's not necessarily a case of like, oh, we didn't want to do it, didn't bother. It will be a case of, okay, that was put forward, it was not agreed. And what I really, for me personally, when something is a no, I've gone out of my way to actually explain to people why it's a no, and some of the mechanism that sat behind that. So I know it can feel as though you can't make a difference, but what I'm going to say, the analogy I use is like the X Factor. People, you don't have to admit to watching the X Factor, it's fine, everyone. But people will have a favourite. They don't vote for their favourite. And the favourite, sometimes the best singers, they get voted off. And people are like, well, that's outrageous. And I say, did you vote for them? Well, no. Well, if you didn't vote for them, and everybody thought, oh, they'll be fine, they're so good. No, and I'd say politics is a bit like that. Do get involved, do share your views, because you never know where that information might end up and how it might transition into something that can benefit the whole of your town, your borough, your area.
Right. The question that I think a lot of people want to know and find it embarrassing to ask, so let me do the embarrassing question, is, do you get paid for any of this?
There's a small, I think it's something like £5,500 a year. So you're not going to be running off to the Bahamas on that. But what you will, it will cover, it's going to cover some of the, if you're expensive, if you're traveling around to meetings. So I think of it like that, almost like a travel bursary. But again, I have no idea what it might be in central London, if they get London waiting or something like that. I don't know, but I can just tell you what it is here. So it's a very small nominal amount, but you're not going to be retiring on that unless you've got very, very small needs.
great. But I think for a lot of people, it's feeling appreciated, isn't it? Just for, it's some kind of recognition of the value of what you're doing, really, rather than completely voluntary. So we've covered all those questions. Why do you do it?
For me, I wanted to get more involved in what was going on, have a bit more of a say in how we shape this town. Now, I live in a conservation area. And so one of the things I really want to do is conserve the area so that it doesn't completely change and get out of hand and things that you think, well, why is that happening? So it was really to be, I guess if I was going to put it like this, to be part of that conversation, and not just part of the conversation, but part of the process for putting my hand up and saying yes or saying no, I disagree with that. And this was a really good way to do it. Now, there are mechanisms in place, which I think is really good, so that no one person can just decide what they want to do and go ahead and do it. There's process, there's scrutiny involved, all of those sorts of things, but to at least be around the table where those conversations are happening and having a chance to express the views of the resident. Because I'll be honest with you, I still think like a resident, you know, in terms of when because somebody will put something forwards and I can see it as a councillor and I can see it from the planning perspective, but then I also put myself back into the seat and go, well, hold on a minute, as a resident, what do I think about this? How does it impact? And what do I think we should be thinking about? And my aim is to always make sure that I can put that resident's hat on so that I can be objective about things and also get that sense of appreciating where the resident is at, how they might see that. And actually, like yourself, asking questions on behalf of the residents. Go, well, hold on a minute. How does that work? Well, can you explain that? I'm not sure about that. And there have been a couple of issues where everybody's sort of been in agreement and I've been like, could you just explain that to me? Or even if I, you know, was in a small minority, I'm still going to say it, because from a resident's point of view, this is, I think, another aspect. So it's really to be involved and be part of that process and mechanism, and being that conduit. It's almost like the bridge between the elected members, the MP, the council, and our residents. So all of the residents might not want to rock up to the town hall, to meetings, etc., but we can certainly have those conversations, collect those views. So I was at a meeting at one of the retirement homes this week, talking, because there's a new development happening a few feet away from where they live. So I've got a long list of things now that I will take to the next planning meeting and be sharing those on behalf of the group of people that I sat with for 2 hours, who shared everything that they were concerned about.
2 hours, that's quite a lot of time. So actually the question I haven't asked you, so I've got 2 questions here. How much time overall, and I suspect there's something here as much as you want or whatever, but how much time do you think it takes for your typical, or to do a good job? How much time of your life? And then secondly, is there a type of person that you think makes a particularly good counsellor? And I can imagine the answer, but I want you to say it.
So the amount of time, it will vary. I'll be honest, it's more time than I thought, because one of the things I hadn't thought about, particularly when I said yes initially, was that there are committee meetings. So you sign up to, so last year and this year probably again, I was on the licensing committee, for example, and the auditing committee. So those meet several times a year, and there can be extraordinary meetings, because licensing, you know, taxi cabs, food and drink beverages, alcohol licenses, that sort of thing, that there will be applications throughout the year. So oftentimes you might have a licensing meeting on a Monday afternoon. So there are those set meetings. There's also training, which is absolutely fantastic that your councillors receive training. So there's that to factor in. And then there's the wildcard nature of requests, because residents can message you at any time about anything. And so that can take time as well. I sit on a couple of boards now. So we've got an almshouse here in Watford. So I'm part of the board of that. We meet several times a year. I'm going to do something with our local Watford Palace Theatre, so I'm going to be kind of sitting in on their board meetings as the kind of representative for the council. So they will meet, I think, 5 or 6 times a year. And then there's all the other stuff, even just, you know, the stuff of replying to emails, reading through documents, preparing for meetings, when preparing for audit committee, not to put anyone off, but, you know, I remember there was a document that had several hundred pages. So now I teach photo reading and accelerated learning, so it's good, it's okay. But you know, that all of those things take time. So I don't know that there's a typical day. But if I look at the last couple of weeks, there are some days I might have spent 4 to 6 hours doing things for the council. And that it was, you know, canvassing included, etc. And canvassing, that's another thing that takes time. We have leaflet deliveries here. I used to think the leaflets were delivered by fairies. Actually, they're not. It's delivered by the councillors. So it's actually quite a lot of time. So I would say don't underestimate that in terms of going forward. So you were asking about the type of person. Again, we're all very different. We did a group photo of all of us after the elections last week with the existing councillors and the new councillors, and it's a very diverse group, and that's changed actually in the last 4 years. The mayor had said the diversity of the group has changed by something like 25% or so in terms of bringing in more diversity since he's been the mayor. In terms of age, I would actually say, if I were choosing and having to do a little person spec, like an avatar, as we call them in marketing, I would say it probably suits someone who is retired, because you've actually got more time available to devote to all of the things and all the extra things you may want to do as well. I would say definitely you want to at least have some semblance of being a people person, you know, in terms of being able to build rapport, have conversations. And one of the things as a councillor, particularly when you're out canvassing and just knocking on someone's door, you've got to be okay with instigating a conversation at the drop of a hat, you know, because somebody opens the door, who are you, what do you want? And now you've got to get into conversation mode. So I'd say there's going to be what we would call those interpersonal skills, the communication skills, the ability to build rapport. Would I say thick-skinned? Let me tell you the context of what I'm thinking of with regards to that. You often get people who are very angry because politics is an emotive issue. If they don't support your party, they're going to tell you all about it. And if they're angry about something that's been happening, they're going to tell you all about it. And although we don't work for the council, because that's where the meetings take place, people see you as the council, so they will sometimes vent their frustrations about the council to you as the councillor. So being able to cope with that and remain calm and balanced and not get into a good old ruckus is, I'd say, is important. And also being personable in your own way, so that I don't know, the word could be approachable. But even if you're not, because I think sometimes when I'm focused, I probably look very serious. But when once somebody said, hey, Marilyn, or Councillor Devonish, as they call you, then I would stop and it will be a different conversation. So just having the ability to be, you know, pleasant around people would be a very, very good trait to have. But I can definitely see why the age demographic is the way it is. Now, we have got quite a few younger councillors where I am here in Watford. Many of them work full time. The council meetings tend to happen in the evening. So the meeting we had yesterday, actually it started a bit early, it started at 6, but when I'm sitting on committee, they either start at 6:30 or 7 p.m, which means even if you're working full time, you can get home, get back out to the meeting. And thankfully, there's a lot that also the official council meetings, now we're out of lockdown, have to be done in person. But with the other interim meetings, a lot of that is online, which makes much better, much more efficient use of your time. So whereas an in-person meeting that's it all you can do in a day, you can probably do 3 or 4 meetings if you're doing them online. So there's scope for that as well. That I guess that's been one of the side effects of lockdown, which I have to be honest, I'm pleased about, because I like to make efficient use of time. But I would definitely say making sure you have the time to devote to it would be really, really important. But rest assured, isn't much, like licensing is an unusual one, but most of the time, if you've got your evenings free, you know, there are functions and things that tend to happen at weekends as well. But I would say retirement community probably are a very good demographic, because you'll have the time and most likely some of the life experiences as well to bring forwards. But if you're watching this and you're in your 20s or 30s, do not let that put you off, because we got some really fantastic young candidates coming through, and it's just so dynamic to have that energy in as well.